The grand ballroom of the Carlton Palace Hotel was glowing with golden lights. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen stars, shining over rows of round tables covered with white cloth and fresh flowers. Soft music floated through the air while wealthy guests laughed loudly and held sparkling glasses in their hands. Cameras flashed from every corner because many important people had come to the charity event that night. At the center of the room stood a beautiful black piano on a raised stage. It looked almost untouched, waiting silently while waiters moved around carrying trays of food and drinks. Most people were busy talking about business, fashion, or social media trends. Hardly anyone paid attention to the piano anymore. Near the entrance doors, a young woman stepped quietly inside. She wore a plain gray coat that looked slightly old compared to the expensive suits and dresses around her. Her dark hair was tied back simply, and she carried a worn canvas bag close to her side. She paused for a moment as if wondering whether she should even be there. A few guests looked at her briefly before turning away again. One waiter frowned. Another whispered something to his coworker while glancing toward her shoes. It was obvious they thought she did not belong among the rich crowd filling the ballroom. The young woman lowered her eyes and slowly walked along the edge of the room, trying not to disturb anyone. She looked calm on the outside, but her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. Her name was Lena. She had not entered a place like this in years. On the far side of the ballroom, a middle-aged man in a dark suit spoke proudly into a microphone. He was the host of the event, smiling widely as cameras pointed toward him. "Tonight," he announced, "we celebrate art, success, and talent. And of course, every donation tonight will support children's education programs across the country." Polite applause spread through the room. Lena quietly found an empty chair near the back wall, close enough to see the piano but far enough to avoid attention. She sat down carefully and kept her eyes on the stage. For a few seconds, the noise around her faded away. The piano brought back memories she spent years trying to bury. A small apartment, cold winter mornings, a tired mother humming softly while cooking soup, tiny fingers pressing piano keys for the very first time. Lena blinked quickly and pushed the memories aside. A loud laugh nearby pulled her back to the present. Two young men standing beside the drink table noticed her staring toward the stage. "You think she's waiting for free food?" one joked quietly. The other chuckled. Lena heard them, but she pretended not to. She had learned long ago that silence was easier than fighting every cruel comment people made. Across the room, an older cleaning worker slowly pushed a cart filled with empty glasses. His back was slightly bent from years of work, and his gray hair showed beneath his cap. As he passed near Lena, he noticed something unusual. Her eyes were not wandering around the ballroom like everyone else's. They were fixed on the piano. Not casually, carefully, almost lovingly. The old worker slowed down. Then he noticed her fingers moving slightly against her knee, almost as if she were silently playing invisible piano keys. His expression changed. He looked at her again with curiosity before quietly moving on. On stage, the event host continued speaking excitedly about the evening's special guests. Famous singers, social media stars, and wealthy sponsors were all introduced one by one. Every name brought cheers and applause from the audience. But Lena remained quiet. She did not clap. She did not smile. She simply watched the piano. After some time, the first live performance of the evening began. A popular jazz band stepped onto the stage, while colorful lights flashed across the ballroom. Guests gathered closer, recording videos for social media while music filled the room. Lena listened politely, but her face remained unreadable. The songs were loud and energetic, yet something felt empty to her. The music had no heart. After the performance ended, the host returned to the microphone. "And now," he said with a grin, "before our headline performers arrive, we thought we'd have a little fun tonight." The audience looked interested. "We're opening the stage for a surprise challenge. Anyone here can come play the piano for 2 minutes." People laughed immediately. Some clapped jokingly. A few guests shouted playful comments from their tables. "Come on. Someone embarrassed themselves. Give us a superstar." The host laughed along with them. "Who knows?" he said. "Maybe we'll discover hidden talent tonight." Nobody moved toward the stage. Most guests were too proud to risk making mistakes in front of such a wealthy crowd. Lena lowered her eyes again. She hoped the moment would pass quickly. But then the old cleaning worker slowly walked near her chair. "You play, don't you?" he asked gently. Lena looked surprised. "What?" "The piano," he said quietly. "I can tell." She quickly shook her head. "No." But her answer came too fast. The old man smiled softly, as if he understood more than she wanted him to. Before he could say anything else, another burst of laughter came from the crowd. One of the wealthy guests pointed toward Lena jokingly. "Maybe she should try," he said loudly enough for others to hear. Several people turned to look at her. A few laughed. Lena felt heat rise in her face. The host noticed the attention and smiled awkwardly. "Well," he joked, "everyone's welcome." More laughter spread across the room. Lena wished the floor would open beneath her. She slowly stood, planning to leave before things became worse. But as she turned toward the exit, her eyes landed on the piano once more. Something inside her stopped. For years she had walked away from music, walked away from stages, walked away from dreams, because dreams had become painful after life changed, after losing everything, after sacrificing every piece of herself just to survive. Yet now, standing in that ballroom filled with strangers, she suddenly remembered something her mother once told her. Music is the only thing that speaks when words fail. Lena swallowed hard. The room continued buzzing with noise and laughter behind her. Without fully understanding why, she slowly turned back around. The crowd noticed immediately. "Oh, this should be good," someone whispered loudly. Phones began rising into the air. People expected entertainment, embarrassment, a joke. Lena walked carefully toward the stage while her heartbeat pounded inside her chest. Every step felt heavier than the last. The host looked uncertain but stepped aside politely as she approached the piano bench. Up close, the piano looked even more beautiful. Its polished surface reflected the ballroom lights like dark water. For one brief moment, Lena hesitated. Her hands trembled slightly. She had not touched a grand piano in almost 10 years. 10 long years of working endless shifts. 10 years of carrying responsibilities that left no room for music. 10 years pretending the piano no longer mattered. The ballroom grew quieter. People waited impatiently. Some smiled with amusement. Others looked bored already. Lena slowly sat down at the piano bench. The room suddenly felt colder. Her fingers hovered above the keys but did not touch them yet. She closed her eyes. And in that silence, memories rushed back stronger than ever. A younger version of herself practicing late at night. Her father clapping proudly from the kitchen doorway. Her mother smiling beside the window. A small music competition where strangers stood cheering for a child prodigy. Then darkness. Hospital hallways. Bills piling up. Dreams disappearing one by one. Lena opened her eyes again. The ballroom was completely silent now. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Nobody expected much anymore. They were simply waiting for the awkward moment to end. Near the back wall, the old cleaning worker stood completely still, watching carefully. Lena took one slow breath. Then she placed her fingers on the piano keys and played the very first note. The first note floated gently through the ballroom like a quiet whisper. At first, nobody reacted. A few guests still held small smiles on their faces, expecting the performance to fall apart at any second. One man near the front even looked down at his phone, barely paying attention. But then Lena played the second note, and the third. Within seconds, something in the room began to change. The sound coming from the piano was soft, deep, and full of feeling. It did not sound nervous or messy like people expected. Every note landed perfectly, flowing into the next like water moving through a river. The crowd slowly became still. The laughter disappeared first. Then the whispering stopped. Even the sound of glasses clinking faded away. Lena kept her eyes on the keys while her fingers moved carefully across the piano. She looked calm now, almost like the world around her no longer existed. The music grew stronger. It carried sadness and warmth at the same time, the kind of feeling that reached people without needing words. Guests who had ignored her only moments earlier now stared at the stage in complete silence. Near the back wall, the old cleaning worker slowly smiled to himself. He knew immediately, this was not luck. This was not a beginner. This was someone who had lived through pain. Someone whose hands remembered music even after years away from it. One of the waiters stopped walking entirely, still holding a tray in his hands. Another guest lowered her phone slowly, forgetting to record because she had become lost in the performance itself. Lena's fingers moved faster now. The soft melody transformed into something powerful and alive. The notes rose higher and higher, filling every corner of the ballroom with energy. It felt less like a performance and more like a storm suddenly waking up inside the piano. People straightened in their seats. Eyes widened across the room. "How is she doing that?" someone whispered. A young man near the stage quietly muttered, "No way." The event host stared in disbelief. Just minutes ago, he had expected an awkward joke for the audience. Now he looked completely frozen beside the stage, unable to speak. Lena still said nothing. She simply played. Years of hidden emotion poured into every movement of her hands. The pain she carried, the dreams she buried, the memories she tried to forget. Somehow all of it came alive through the music. The ballroom no longer felt like a rich social event. It felt personal, real, human. An older woman sitting near the center table slowly wiped tears from her eyes without even realizing it. Across from her, her husband quietly reached for her hand. The music touched everyone differently. Some felt hope. Some remembered old memories. Some simply sat there wondering why their hearts suddenly felt heavy. Lena's hands flew across the keys with incredible speed now, but there was still softness hidden inside every note. Her music was not about showing off. It was about feeling. That was why nobody could look away. Phones began recording again, but this time for a completely different reason. Guests were no longer trying to capture a funny moment. They were witnessing something unforgettable. Near the entrance doors, two young women hurried inside after hearing the music from the hallway. "What's happening?" one asked quietly. "I don't know," the other whispered back. "But listen." By now, even workers from the kitchen had begun peeking through the doors. The entire hotel seemed drawn toward the ballroom. Lena suddenly shifted into a faster rhythm. The room exploded with energy. The calm, emotional melody turned bold and electric. Her fingers moved across the piano with breathtaking speed, while the powerful sound shook through the ballroom walls. It was impossible to believe this was the same quiet woman people had laughed at only minutes earlier. Several guests stood up from their chairs without realizing it. The energy was contagious. The piano sounded alive beneath Lena's hands. One famous musician attending the event leaned forward in complete shock. He had performed around the world for years, yet even he could not understand how someone hidden from the public could play with this much skill and emotion. "She's incredible," he murmured softly. Nearby, another guest whispered, "Who is she?" Nobody knew. That mystery only made the moment feel bigger. Lena's face remained calm, but deep inside, emotions crashed through her like waves. For years she had locked music away. After her parents passed away, life became survival instead of dreams. She worked long shifts at restaurants, cleaned offices late at night, and gave up every opportunity she once had. Music slowly became something painful because it reminded her of the life she lost. But now, sitting at the piano again, those walls inside her were finally breaking apart. For the first time in years, she felt alive. The music grew softer once more. Gentle notes floated through the room like falling rain after a storm. The sudden calmness made the ballroom feel emotional again. Some guests looked completely stunned by the change in emotion. It felt impossible that one person could create so many feelings through music alone. At a table near the stage, a young boy around 10 years old stared at Lena with wide eyes. He had been bored and restless all evening, but now he sat perfectly still, watching every movement of her hands. His mother leaned closer and whispered, "Beautiful, isn't it?" The boy nodded slowly. "I want to learn piano," he whispered back. Meanwhile, videos of the performance had already started spreading online. Guests live-streamed pieces of the music while comments flooded across social media. "Who is this woman? This is the best piano performance I've ever heard. I got chills." People from around the world began sharing clips within minutes. But inside the ballroom, nobody cared about the internet anymore. All attention stayed on Lena. The music began building again toward something bigger, stronger, faster, more emotional. Her fingers danced across the piano keys so naturally that it no longer seemed possible she had stopped playing for years. It looked like the piano itself had been waiting for her return. The old cleaning worker slowly sat down on a nearby chair, overwhelmed by emotion. He remembered hearing stories long ago about a gifted young pianist who suddenly disappeared after tragedy struck her family. Back then, newspapers called her a rising star. Then one day, she vanished. Could this really be the same person? Lena suddenly played a final powerful series of notes that rolled through the ballroom like thunder. The sound shook the room. And then, silence. Her hands stopped moving. The final note lingered softly in the air before disappearing completely. For one long second, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The room seemed frozen in shock. Then the entire ballroom erupted. Thunderous applause exploded from every corner. Guests jumped to their feet, clapping loudly while cheers filled the air. Some people shouted in disbelief while others simply stared at Lena as if they had just witnessed something impossible. The noise became overwhelming. People who had mocked her earlier were now cheering the loudest. Phones flashed everywhere. "Bravo! Incredible! Play another one!" The host finally snapped out of his shock and rushed toward the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said breathlessly, I don't even know what to say." The applause continued growing louder. But Lena looked terrified. The attention hit her all at once like a wave crashing over her. Her breathing became shallow. Her hands trembled slightly again. For a moment, she looked around the ballroom as if she suddenly remembered where she was. All those eyes, all those cameras, all that noise. It was too much. The same fear she spent years running from came rushing back into her chest. Without saying a single word, Lena quickly stood from the piano bench. The audience kept clapping, expecting her to bow or smile. Instead, she stepped away from the piano immediately. The host reached out as if to stop her. "Wait, miss, please." But Lena was already walking quickly off the stage. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. "Where's she going? Someone stop her." Several reporters and guests hurried after her, desperate to learn who she was. Cameras followed closely while people shouted questions from every direction. "What's your name? Have you performed professionally before? How long have you played piano?" Lena's heartbeat pounded loudly in her ears. She pushed through the hallway behind the ballroom, trying to escape the growing crowd. Her breathing became shaky as flashes from cameras followed her down the corridor. The old memories were returning again. Competition halls, pressure, fame, expectations, pain. She could not go through that life another time. Not again. Behind her, voices continued calling out. But Lena kept moving faster. She reached the back exit of the hotel, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped out into the cold night air. The city sounds rushed around her instantly. For a moment, she simply stood there breathing heavily beneath the dim streetlights. Inside the ballroom, people were still cheering for the mysterious pianist who appeared out of nowhere. But outside, Lena quietly disappeared into the night before anyone could learn her story. Rain began falling lightly as Lena walked quickly down the empty street outside the hotel. The cold wind pushed against her coat while distant city lights reflected across the wet pavement. Behind her, the noise from the ballroom had already faded, but her heart was still racing. She kept walking without looking back. Her hands trembled slightly inside her pockets. She hated attention, hated cameras, hated crowds staring at her like she was something special. For years she had built a quiet life where nobody knew her story. Tonight changed everything. A passing bus rolled through the street as Lena stopped near a small convenience store. She looked through the dark window at her reflection for a moment. She barely recognized herself anymore. Not because of the performance, because of the feeling it brought back. When she played the piano tonight, something inside her woke up again. Something she thought had disappeared forever. That scared her more than anything. She pulled her coat tighter and continued walking toward the old apartment building where she lived. The building sat in a quieter part of the city, far from expensive hotels and luxury events. Paint peeled from the walls near the entrance, and the elevator almost never worked. Lena climbed the stairs slowly until she reached the 4th floor. Before unlocking the apartment door, she paused. Music was playing softly from inside. Not piano music. A small radio. Lena took a breath and stepped inside. The apartment was tiny but warm. Books were stacked neatly near the sofa, and a single lamp lit the living room with soft yellow light. At the table sat a young man surrounded by notebooks and papers. The moment he looked up, his eyes widened. "You finally answered your phone," he said quickly, standing from the chair. "Do you even know what's happening online right now?" Lena immediately looked away. "I don't want to know. But everyone's talking about you." The young man grabbed his phone from the table and walked toward her. His excitement was impossible to hide. "They recorded your performance. Millions of people are sharing it already." Lena sighed tiredly and placed her bag near the door. "Please don't start." "I'm serious," he said softly now. "People are calling you the mystery pianist." Lena closed her eyes for a moment. The words felt unreal. She had spent years trying to become invisible. Now suddenly the world wanted to find her. The young man watching her carefully was her younger brother, Ian. He was 20 years old, studying engineering at college while working part-time at a bookstore nearby. Lena had raised him almost like a parent after their mother and father passed away years earlier. Everything she sacrificed had been for him. Every missed dream, every sleepless night, every opportunity she walked away from. Ian noticed the exhaustion on her face and lowered his voice. "You okay?" Lena nodded quietly, though she was not sure it was true. "I shouldn't have played." Ian stared at her in disbelief. "What?" "Lena, people loved it. That's the problem." He frowned slightly. She walked toward the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water before continuing. "You don't understand what comes after attention like this." Ian leaned against the table silently. Actually, he did understand. At least partly. Years ago, before life fell apart, Lena had been known as a piano prodigy. Videos of her performances once appeared everywhere online. Music schools competed to offer her scholarships. Famous teachers wanted to train her. Then their parents died in a terrible highway accident during a winter storm. Everything changed overnight. Lena was only 19. Ian was still a child. Instead of chasing concerts and competitions, Lena suddenly found herself paying bills, working jobs, and trying to keep their lives together. Little by little, music disappeared from her life. And eventually, so did she. Most people assumed the talented young pianist had simply quit. Nobody knew the real story. Ian looked at his sister carefully now. "You looked happy tonight," he said softly. Lena froze slightly. She did not answer, because he was right. For a few minutes at that piano, she forgot about stress, bills, and pain. She forgot about the years she spent surviving instead of living. She felt free again. That frightened her. A loud knock suddenly interrupted the silence. Both of them looked toward the apartment door. Another knock came, firmer this time. Lena immediately became tense. "Nobody should know where we live," she whispered. Ian carefully walked to the door and looked through the small peephole. "There's a man outside." "Who?" "I don't know." Lena's stomach tightened. Ian opened the door cautiously. Standing outside was a man around his early 30s wearing a dark jacket and holding a small notebook in his hand. Raindrops still covered his shoulders from outside. "Sorry for coming this late," he said politely. "I'm looking for Lena." Lena stepped closer carefully. "Who are you?" "My name is Daniel," the man replied calmly. "I'm a writer for a local news company." Lena immediately shook her head. "No interviews. I'm not here to pressure you." That's what reporters always say. Daniel gave a small awkward smile. Fair point. Ian crossed his arms suspiciously while Lena stayed silent near the doorway. Daniel looked genuinely nervous, unlike the loud reporters chasing stories online. I just wanted to talk, he said quietly. That performance tonight, it affected people. I don't need attention, Lena replied. I can see that. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Daniel surprised her. My mother played piano, he said softly. Not professionally, just at home. She passed away a few years ago. Lena's expression changed slightly. When you played tonight, he continued, it reminded me of sitting beside her as a kid. I haven't felt that in years. His voice sounded honest. Not fake. Not dramatic. Just human. Lena looked away for a moment. Daniel slowly held up his notebook. I'm not trying to turn you into gossip headlines. I actually want people to understand your story. There is no story. That's not true. Silence filled the hallway again. Ian finally spoke. Maybe you should hear him out. Lena gave him an annoyed look. You too. I'm just saying. Not everyone wants to use you. Daniel nodded quickly. Exactly. Lena hesitated before finally stepping aside from the doorway. 5 minutes, she said. Daniel entered carefully, looking around the small apartment. It was clear immediately that the siblings lived simply. Old furniture, stacked textbooks, tiny kitchen. Nothing about the place matched the powerful performance people saw online. Daniel sat at the table while Lena remained standing. Why did you disappear? He asked gently. Lena almost laughed at the question. Disappear. As if she had chosen some dramatic mystery. I didn't disappear, she said quietly. Life happened. Daniel waited patiently. Lena looked down at her hands before speaking again. After my parents died, somebody had to take care of things. Rent, school, food. She glanced toward Ian briefly. Dreams become less important when survival shows up. Ian lowered his eyes. Even after all these years, guilt still lived inside him. He knew how much Lena gave up for him. Daniel listened carefully without interrupting. No family helped? He asked. Lena shook her head. Not really. So you stopped playing? At first, I thought it was temporary. A sad smile appeared briefly on her face. Then months became years. The apartment became quiet except for rain tapping softly against the windows. Daniel noticed something sitting near the corner of the room beneath a cloth cover. A piano keyboard. Old, dusty, used. You still practice sometimes? He asked. Lena followed his gaze quickly. Not really, but Ian spoke before she could continue. She plays late at night sometimes when she thinks nobody hears her. Lena gave him another look. What? You do? Daniel smiled slightly. I knew it. Lena sat down finally, suddenly looking exhausted. I only played tonight because... She stopped herself. Because what? She stared toward the rainy window. Because for 1 second, I missed who I used to be. Nobody spoke after that. The honesty in her voice filled the room heavily. Daniel slowly closed his notebook. I'm not going to write anything tonight, he said calmly. Lena looked surprised. You're not? No. Why? Because I think people already saw enough tonight to know you're special. He stood from the chair. The rest of your story should be shared only if you want it shared. For the first time since meeting him, Lena looked slightly less guarded. Daniel moved toward the apartment door before pausing. But I will say one thing. Lena waited quietly. Running away from music clearly didn't erase it. After he left, silence returned to the apartment. Ian sat across from his sister watching her carefully. He's right, you know? Lena leaned back tiredly. I don't know what's right anymore. Her phone suddenly vibrated across the table. Then again, and again. Messages. Unknown calls. Notifications. The internet had found her. Ian looked at the screen and shook his head in disbelief. You're everywhere right now. Lena stared at the phone without touching it. Years ago, she thought losing music would hurt the most. But tonight showed her something worse. Maybe the hardest thing was realizing she never truly let it go. The next morning, Lena woke up to the sound of her phone vibrating again. She opened her eyes slowly and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds before remembering everything that had happened the night before. The hotel, the piano, the crowd, the videos online. She turned toward the small table beside the couch where her phone rested. Notifications continued flashing across the screen nonstop. Missed calls, messages, emails, interview requests, music companies, television programs. People she had never met suddenly wanted her attention. Lena rubbed her face tiredly and sat up. Across the room, Ian was already awake, sitting at the table with his laptop open. His eyes looked wide with disbelief. "You should see this," he said quietly. "I really shouldn't. You're trending everywhere." Lena groaned softly. Ian turned the laptop toward her anyway. Video clips from the ballroom covered the screen. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. News pages calling her the hidden piano genius. People from different countries were sharing reactions to her performance. One video showed the exact moment the ballroom fell silent after her first notes. Another focused on the crowd standing and cheering at the end. Lena immediately looked away. "I hate this." Ian studied her face carefully. "No, you hate attention," he corrected softly. "That's different." Before Lena could answer, another phone call appeared on the screen. Unknown number. She ignored it. Then another came. And another. Finally, Ian sighed. "You can't avoid this forever." "Yes, I can." He almost smiled. "You disappeared for 10 years. I think you already proved that." Lena stood and walked toward the kitchen area. She poured herself coffee while trying to ignore the endless buzzing sounds behind her. Part of her wanted to throw the phone out the window. Another part of her wanted to sit at a piano again. That second feeling scared her the most. A knock suddenly came at the apartment door. Lena froze immediately. Ian peeked through the small door viewer. "It's the writer guy again." Lena hesitated. "Tell him I'm busy." "He probably already knows you're hiding." She gave him a tired look. Ian opened the door before she could stop him. Daniel stood outside holding a paper coffee cup tray in one hand. "I brought peace offerings," he said awkwardly. Lena crossed her arms. "You journalists really don't give up." "I told you yesterday," he replied calmly. "I'm not here to pressure you." He handed one of the coffees toward Ian before looking at Lena again. "I actually came to warn you." Her expression changed slightly. "Warn me about what?" Daniel stepped inside carefully. "People are trying to find you already. Reporters showed up at the hotel this morning asking questions. Some online pages are posting random fake stories about your past." Lena looked frustrated immediately. "Exactly why I didn't want any of this." Daniel nodded. "I understand. But that's also why you should tell your story yourself before others create one for you." Lena stayed silent. She hated admitting it, but he had a point. The internet could turn anybody into something false overnight. Ian sat at the table listening carefully. Daniel pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket pocket and placed it gently on the table. The front page showed a photo of Lena sitting at the piano. The headline read, "The woman who stopped an entire ballroom." Lena stared at it quietly. For years, nobody noticed her existence. Now her face was everywhere. "It feels unreal," Ian admitted softly. Daniel nodded. "It probably feels terrifying for her." Lena looked at him for a moment, surprised by the understanding in his voice. Most people saw only the exciting side of sudden fame. They did not see fear, pressure, memories, the loss of privacy. Daniel sat down slowly. "There's something else," he said. Lena immediately became cautious again. "What now?" "A national charity concert contacted me this morning." Her face dropped instantly. "No, you don't even know what they asked yet." "I already know the answer." Daniel tried not to smile. "They want you to perform." Lena shook her head before he could continue. "No, this isn't some reality show. No, it's a charity event for children who lost parents or homes during difficult situations. Lena's expression softened slightly despite herself. Daniel continued carefully. The organizers said your story connected with people emotionally. They think your music could inspire others. Lena walked toward the window and stared outside quietly. The city looked gray and rainy again. I can't do concerts anymore. Why? She laughed bitterly. You saw me run away from a ballroom after one performance. That wasn't weakness. It felt like weakness. Daniel stood slowly. Lena, you played for 2 minutes and moved an entire room full of strangers. People don't react like that to fake emotion. She stayed silent. Ian finally spoke softly from behind her. You should at least think about it. Lena turned around quickly. You too. I'm serious. She stared at him in disbelief. Ian, you know what happened last time I lived that life? Yes, he said quietly. And I also know you haven't truly been happy since you left it. The room fell silent again. Lena looked away first. Those words hurt because they were true. Later that afternoon, after Daniel left, Lena decided to go outside for fresh air. She wore a cap and kept her coat hood up, hoping nobody would recognize her. For a while it worked. She walked through quieter streets, trying to clear her thoughts. But near a small cafe, 2 teenagers suddenly gasped while looking at their phones. That's her, one whispered loudly. Lena immediately turned away and walked faster. The girls did not seem rude or aggressive. They looked excited more than anything else. Still, Lena's chest tightened. Being recognized felt strange, uncomfortable, almost unreal. She eventually found herself standing outside an old community center several blocks away. The building looked worn but familiar. Years ago, after quitting music school, Lena sometimes came here late at night because the center allowed local musicians to practice for free. She had not visited in a long time. Almost without thinking, she stepped inside. The place smelled exactly the same. Old wood floors, dust, coffee from the front desk. Some things never changed. A woman at the reception desk looked up and smiled warmly. Well, she said, look who finally came back. Lena blinked in surprise. The receptionist laughed softly. You think I wouldn't recognize you after the internet exploded? Lena smiled awkwardly. I was hoping. You still owe us for disappearing all those years. Lena looked down slightly. Yeah. Sorry about that. The woman pointed toward a hallway. Practice rooms are still open. Lena hesitated, then slowly walked toward the music rooms. Her heartbeat grew heavier with every step. At the end of the hallway stood an old upright piano inside a small practice room. The same piano she used years ago. Lena stepped inside quietly and closed the door behind her. The room was tiny, simple, silent. She sat down at the piano bench slowly. For a few moments, she only stared at the keys. Then she gently pressed one note. The sound echoed softly through the room. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Another note followed. Then another. Soon music began flowing naturally again. No cameras. No audience. No pressure. Just her. For the first time since the ballroom performance, Lena felt calm. But outside the practice room door, someone had stopped walking after hearing the music. An older man carrying sheet music stood quietly listening. Then another person slowed down. And another. Within minutes, several people gathered silently in the hallway outside. Nobody spoke. They simply listened. Lena did not notice at first. She had become lost inside the music completely. The same emotion from the ballroom returned again, but this time it felt gentler, safer, like reconnecting with an old part of herself she thought was gone forever. A small smile appeared on her face while she played. Outside the room, a young girl whispered to her mother, "She sounds magical." The mother nodded softly. Lena finally looked up after finishing the song, and froze. People stood outside the doorway listening quietly, not filming, not shouting, just listening. The older man carrying sheet music smiled warmly. "You should never have stopped playing." Lena looked down at the piano keys again. Maybe he was right. That evening, she returned home feeling emotionally exhausted. Ian immediately noticed something different in her face. "You played again, didn't you? Lena placed her bag down slowly. Maybe. Ian smiled for the first time all day. Then her phone rang again. Daniel. Lena almost ignored it. Almost. Finally, she answered. What? I have one question, he said calmly. What now? Did you think about the concert? Lena leaned against the kitchen counter quietly. Part of her wanted to say no immediately, but another part remembered the little girl outside the practice room saying the music sounded magical. And for the first time in years, Lena wondered something dangerous. What if music was not the thing destroying her life? What if leaving it behind was the real reason she felt lost? For the next few days, Lena tried to avoid making a decision about the charity concert. But life around her refused to stay quiet anymore. Everywhere she went, people recognized her. Some smiled warmly. Some asked for photos. Others simply stared in surprise after realizing the woman from the viral piano video was standing right in front of them. At first, the attention made Lena uncomfortable. She kept her head down while walking through the city and avoided crowded places whenever possible. But something else slowly began happening too. People started sharing their own stories with her. One afternoon at the grocery store, an older man stopped her near the checkout line. You reminded me of my wife, he said softly. She used to play piano before she passed away. Another day, a teenage girl approached her outside the community center. I almost quit music last year, the girl admitted nervously. But after seeing your video, I started practicing again. Those moments stayed with Lena long after the conversations ended. For years, she believed music belonged to her past. Now she was beginning to realize it still mattered to people, maybe even more than she understood. Still, fear remained inside her. Every night she sat awake thinking about the concert invitation. Millions of viewers. A giant stage. Cameras everywhere. The pressure alone felt overwhelming. One evening, while Lena practiced quietly at the community center, Daniel walked into the room carrying 2 cups of coffee again. You really like showing up uninvited, Lena said without looking up from the piano. And you really pretend not to enjoy the company. She shook her head, though a small smile almost appeared. Daniel sat nearby while Lena continued playing softly. You sound different lately, he said after a while. How? Happier. Her hands slowed slightly on the keys. I'm not sure happy is the right word. What is? Lena thought for a moment. Less lost, maybe. Daniel nodded quietly. Then his expression became more serious. The concert organizers need your answer soon. Lena immediately looked away from the piano. I know. They're willing to give you complete control over your performance. No interviews. No reality show drama. Just music. That's not what scares me. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Then what does? Lena stared at the piano keys silently. Finally, she spoke in a quieter voice. What if I fail? Daniel looked genuinely confused. You already proved yourself. One viral performance doesn't mean anything. It meant something to a lot of people. That's exactly the problem, she admitted softly. What if people expect too much now? The room became quiet. Daniel understood something important in that moment. Lena was not afraid of performing badly. She was afraid of disappointing people after they believed in her again. Before he could answer, someone knocked gently on the open practice room door. A little girl from earlier stepped inside carefully with her mother beside her. The girl held a folded piece of paper nervously. I made this for you, she whispered. Lena looked surprised as the girl handed her the drawing. It showed a piano under bright stars with the words, Thank you for making music again. Lena stared at the paper for several seconds without speaking. The little girl smiled shyly. My mom says music helps people heal. Then she waved goodbye and left the room. Lena looked down at the drawing again. Something inside her chest tightened emotionally. Daniel smiled softly. You still think your music means nothing? Lena could not answer. A few nights later, the charity concert organizers arranged a private meeting with Lena at a quiet theater downtown. The stage was enormous. Rows upon rows of empty seats stretched into darkness beneath dim lights. Lena stood silently near the center aisle while the organizer spoke excitedly nearby. The event will raise money for children and families rebuilding their lives after hardship, he explained. We believe your story connects perfectly with the message of hope. Lena looked toward the giant piano sitting alone on stage. Felt beautiful and terrifying. You don't have to decide tonight, the organizer added kindly. But I hope you'll consider it. Lena slowly walked onto the stage after he left. The huge empty theater made her feel small. Years ago, stages like this used to feel exciting. Now they felt heavy with memories. Ian quietly joined her near the piano after the meeting ended. You're shaking, he noticed. I know. You don't have to do this. Lena looked at him carefully. Do you want the truth? Always. She took a slow breath. Part of me already said yes. Ian smiled immediately. But another part of me wants to run away again. He nodded with understanding. Then his expression changed slightly. There's something I need to tell you. Lena looked confused. Ian stared down at the theater seats before speaking. For years, I blamed myself. Her face softened instantly. Ian. No, listen. His voice shook slightly. You gave up everything because of me. That's not true. It is. You were a kid. And you were supposed to have your own life. Lena looked down quietly. Ian continued. I watched you work yourself exhausted while pretending you were okay. Every time I saw a piano, I knew what it cost you to walk away from it. The theater became silent around them. Ian's eyes looked emotional now. I don't want to be the reason you stay afraid forever. Lena felt tears burning behind her eyes. You were never a burden, she whispered. You sacrificed your dreams. No, she said softly. I protected my family. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ian smiled weakly. Maybe now it's time to protect your dream too. Those words stayed in Lena's mind long after they left the theater. 3 days later, she finally gave the organizers her answer. Yes. The moment the announcement went public, the internet exploded again. News pages shared headlines everywhere. The mystery pianist returns to the stage. The viral piano star will perform live. People immediately began counting down the days until the concert. But along with excitement came criticism too. Some online users accused Lena of planning everything for fame. Others claimed her story sounded fake. She disappeared for years and suddenly returns viral? Convenient. Probably just marketing. She's overrated. At first, Lena pretended the comments did not bother her. But late at night, she sometimes read them quietly while sitting alone. The words hurt more than she expected. One evening during rehearsal, she suddenly stopped playing halfway through a song. Daniel, sitting quietly in the audience seats, noticed immediately. What happened? Lena stared at the piano. Maybe they're right. Who? The people online. Daniel almost laughed. Online comments are not reality. But what if this is all too much? What if people only care because I disappeared? Daniel walked closer to the stage. No, he said firmly. People care because you're real. Lena looked away. You know what I think? He continued. Most people are tired of fake perfection. Then they saw someone honest sit at a piano and play like every emotion mattered. That's why they connected with you. Lena stayed silent. Daniel smiled slightly. And for the record, millions of strangers don't cry during performances they don't care about. For the first time in days, Lena laughed softly. The rehearsals continued. Slowly, her confidence returned little by little. The closer the concert came, the more natural the piano felt beneath her hands again. Not perfect, not fearless, but real. Finally, the night of the concert arrived. The massive theater buzzed with energy. Cameras moved across crowds, filling every seat while backstage workers rushed around preparing for the live broadcast. Famous singers and musicians walked through the hallways surrounded by assistants and reporters. But backstage in a quieter corner, Lena sat alone beside the piano room trying to steady her breathing. Her hands felt cold. The nervousness was worse than she expected. From backstage monitors, she could hear the audience cheering after another performer finished. Millions of people were watching from home too. Suddenly, panic hit her chest hard. Too many people. Too much pressure. Too many expectations. Lena stood quickly. I can't do this. Ian immediately stood in front of her. Yes, you can. No, she whispered. I shouldn't have agreed. Daniel stepped closer calmly. Look at me. She shook her head anxiously. Lena. Finally, she looked at him. You are not walking onto that stage to impress people, he said softly. You're walking out there because music is part of who you are. Ian nodded beside him. You already survived the hardest years of your life. A stage can't defeat you. Lena's breathing slowly steadied. Then a backstage worker approached carefully. You're on in 1 minute. The hallway suddenly felt silent. Lena looked toward the stage entrance where bright lights glowed beyond the curtain. Fear still lived inside her. But something stronger stood beside it now. Hope. She took one long breath, then slowly walked toward the stage. The bright stage lights nearly blinded Lena as she walked out from behind the curtain. For a moment, the massive theater felt endless. Thousands of people filled the seats in front of her while cameras moved slowly across the audience. The energy inside the building was overwhelming. Some people clapped the moment they recognized her. Others lifted phones into the air, ready to record every second. Lena's heartbeat pounded hard inside her chest. She almost stopped walking. But then she spotted Ian standing quietly near the side of the stage. He gave her a small nod. Not pressure. Not expectation. Just support. Lena took another breath and continued toward the piano. The applause slowly faded as she sat down at the bench. Suddenly, the theater became completely silent. Millions of viewers watched from their homes around the world. Some sat in crowded living rooms. Others watched alone late at night on phones or laptops. Social media pages filled with comments waiting for the mysterious pianist to begin. But on stage, Lena heard none of it. She only saw the piano in front of her. For a few seconds, her hands rested quietly above the keys. Memories rushed through her mind all at once. Her parents smiling proudly during childhood piano lessons. Long nights working exhausting jobs. The small apartment she shared with Ian. Years spent pretending music no longer mattered. And the ballroom where everything suddenly changed. A single tear formed in her eye, but she quickly blinked it away. Then she played the first note. The sound echoed softly through the theater. Gentle, warm, honest. The crowd became even quieter somehow. Lena closed her eyes briefly as the melody slowly grew stronger. Unlike her performance at the hotel, this music felt deeply personal. Every note carried pieces of her life inside it. Pain, love, loss, hope. The piano no longer sounded like an instrument. It sounded like someone telling the truth. People in the audience leaned forward quietly. Some stopped recording because they became too emotional to focus on their phones anymore. A woman near the front row wiped tears from her face. An older man closed his eyes while listening. Even backstage workers paused what they were doing. The music held everyone still. Lena's nervousness slowly disappeared with every note she played. For the first time in years, she stopped fighting herself. She stopped worrying about expectations. Stopped worrying about mistakes. Stopped worrying about whether she deserved to be there. She simply played from the heart. The melody grew stronger now, filling the entire theater with emotion. Her fingers moved faster across the piano keys, but the music never lost its feeling. Every part of the performance sounded alive. The audience could feel it. This was not someone trying to become famous. This was someone finally allowing herself to be seen again. Backstage, Daniel watched silently beside Ian. She's different tonight, Daniel whispered. Ian smiled softly. No, he replied. She's finally herself again. On stage, Lena suddenly shifted into a softer melody. A melody almost nobody recognized at first. But Ian froze instantly. His eyes widened with emotion. He knew that song. Their mother used to hum it quietly while cooking dinner years ago. It was unfinished. A small melody their mother once created but never completed before she passed away. Lena had remembered it all these years. and now she was turning it into something beautiful. Ian covered his mouth emotionally as tears filled his eyes. Daniel looked at him in surprise. "What is it?" "That song," Ian whispered. "It was our mother's." The emotional weight of the moment hit him hard. For years, their family had carried pain silently. But somehow, through music, Lena was finally speaking about it without saying a single word. Out in the audience, people could feel the emotion even if they did not know the story behind it. The theater became filled with quiet tears. The melody slowly built into something bigger, stronger, more hopeful. It no longer sounded sad. It sounded healing. Lena's fingers danced across the piano with confidence now. Every ounce of fear she carried earlier seemed to disappear into the music itself. Social media exploded in real time. Comments flooded every live stream. "This is unbelievable. I'm crying. She's not just playing piano. She's telling a story. I've never felt music like this before." Inside the theater, the energy kept growing. People who arrived expecting entertainment were now experiencing something much deeper. Connection. A reminder of grief. A reminder of survival. A reminder that broken people can still create beautiful things. Lena opened her eyes briefly while playing. For the first time, the giant crowd no longer terrified her. Instead, she realized something important. Everyone sitting there carried pain too. Different stories, different struggles, different losses. Maybe that was why music mattered so much. Because sometimes people needed feelings more than words. The performance reached its most powerful moment. Her hands moved across the piano with breathtaking speed and emotion, while the melody soared through the theater like light breaking through darkness. The audience erupted into applause in the middle of the performance without meaning to. Some people stood up already. Others cried openly. Cameras captured emotional faces across the crowd. Backstage workers hugged each other quietly. Even several famous performers waiting for their own turns stood silently watching in complete admiration. Then, slowly, Lena brought the music back down again. The final section became soft and peaceful, almost like a goodbye to the painful years she carried alone. The last notes floated gently into the air. And then, silence. Complete silence filled the theater for one long second. Lena slowly lifted her hands from the piano. Her breathing trembled slightly. Then the entire theater exploded. Thunderous applause crashed through the building louder than anything she had ever heard before. People jumped to their feet cheering. Some shouted her name. Others simply clapped with tears still running down their faces. The standing ovation continued and continued. Lena sat frozen at the piano, overwhelmed. Years ago, applause made her anxious. Tonight, it felt different. Not because of fame, because for the first time, she understood why people connected with her music. It made them feel less alone. Ian wiped tears from his face while smiling proudly backstage. Daniel looked at him and laughed softly. "She just changed her life." Ian shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "She got her life back." The charity event raised more money than organizers expected. Donations poured in from viewers around the world after the performance ended. News channels replayed clips of Lena's music for days afterward. But unlike before, Lena did not run away this time. She still avoided unnecessary attention and interviews, but something inside her had changed. She no longer felt ashamed of the part of herself connected to music. Weeks later, opportunities continued arriving from everywhere. World tours, television appearances, recording contracts, huge offers with unbelievable amounts of money. But Lena surprised everyone with her decision. She turned most of them down. Instead, she focused on something else entirely. One afternoon, she visited the old community center again. Children filled the hallways carrying instruments while laughter echoed through the building. The receptionist smiled the moment she saw Lena. "You're becoming hard to recognize now," she joked. Lena laughed softly. "Still feels strange hearing that." The director of the center walked over holding papers excitedly. "We can officially start the music program next month." Lena smiled warmly. That had become her new dream. Using the money from the concert and donations from supporters, she decided to help create free music classes for children from struggling families. Children who could not afford lessons. Children carrying heavy lives at young ages. Children who needed hope the same way she once did. Ian stood beside her proudly while workers prepared classrooms inside the center. "You really did it," he said. "We did it," Lena corrected gently. Soon, the rooms filled with old donated pianos, violins, guitars, and keyboards. Volunteers arrived offering free lessons. The small community center slowly transformed into a place full of music again. And for the first time in years, Lena truly looked happy. Not because the internet loved her. Not because people called her talented. But because she finally stopped running from herself. One evening after the center closed, Lena sat alone inside one of the quiet music rooms. The building had become peaceful again after the children left for the night. Soft golden light from the hallway spilled across the piano keys. Lena placed her fingers gently on the piano and began playing the same melody from the ballroom where everything started. The notes floated softly through the empty hallway, but this time there was no fear attached to them. Only peace. Outside the room, a few children who had forgotten their backpacks stopped quietly to listen. One little boy whispered, "She makes the piano sound alive." Lena heard the comment and smiled to herself without stopping the music. Years ago, she thought losing music would protect her from pain. Instead, she discovered that music had been protecting her all along. And now, finally, she was home again.